So we have this idea now that the president maintains his authority at the commander-in-chief, and he's expanded it. And we've seen this in several instances, and I'm going to talk specifically about the war power. The two Bushes, first one in Desert Storm and the second one recently, have asked for congressional approval, not a declaration of war, but approval for their wars. But they did so. They say, we don't really need to do this. I have the inherent authority as commander-in-chief to do this war, but I'm just doing this as a courtesy. Now, they both said that. Now, we have other examples that we have here. As I mentioned, some presidents will try to get the UN approval, and they don't care about the congressional approval. They say, well, this, got the UN, that's all we need. Clinton, in the case of Kosovo, he didn't do either. He knew he couldn't get a UN resolution to bomb Serbia and Kosovo, and he wasn't going to get a congressional resolution or approval, any sort of approval, because of the Republican Congress. So he just went ahead and did it anyway. He had no UN approval, and he had no congressional approval. That's probably the ultimate, abuse of power. Now, of course, we have a commander-in-chief who believes that in time of an emergency, he doesn't have to follow congressionally passed laws. Now, that's the road to dictatorship there, if you ask me, because the Congress is supposed to pass laws, and the president is not supposed to ignore them. And of course, the Constitution, and we've had the Supreme Court saying this, the Constitution is not abrogated during time of war or emergency. In fact, that's when you really need it. But of course, Bush is, and I think other people have discussed this, FISA law, where he is not getting warrants for domestic wiretaps. To me, that's more dangerous than the Iraq War. And I think because this affects the Republic here at home, and of course, he has done other things. He has virtually suspended habeas corpus, and then he got congressional approval for it. Now, of course, Lincoln did the same thing, but the Congress, according to the Constitution, the Congress is supposed to suspend habeas corpus if it gets suspended. Excuse me, and then only in times of invasion or rebellion, which we haven't had either of those. Now, of the two wars, the war on terror or the war in Iraq, the war on terror is much scarier. Now, number one, it's more legitimate in the public eyes, but also it's permanent. The war of Iraq is going to go away, and in fact, the Republicans are so scared behind the scenes here in Washington, D.C., that I think you will see the troops, their toleration is waning for this war. They're all scared that they're not going to be reelected, so I think you'll see Republicans peel off from this. So that doesn't mean that the president won't try to keep troops there, but I think the public is souring on Iraq, and I think it will go away. Unfortunately, the war on terror is going to be with us for a while, and it's just going to be exactly like the Cold War, a permanent war against, and in fact, it's worse than the Cold War, because we knew the Cold War was over when the Soviet Union fell apart. It was a big nation state. These terrorists, they could be around forever, and if Al-Qaeda gets killed, there'll be other groups. We had the Palestinian Liberation Organization before that. We had the Red Army, the Red Brigades in the 70s, et cetera. So there's always going to be some groups out there that are, attacking for whatever reason. And usually they're attacking other countries, because most of the terrorist groups on the U.S. terrorism list don't attack the U.S., which, including the groups that Saddam Hussein supported. But anyway, so this enemy can be, recycled, and new groups can be found to fight. So we have this progression of executive increases in executive power. And I'll just take you through a few presidents. Eisenhower, although more restrained from an overt military standpoint, he pioneered fighting the Cold War with the CIA. He did a lot of covert operations. He tried to overthrow a lot of governments. And Truman, although creating the CIA, he used it mainly for intelligence, but Ike shifted it to covert operations, where it's, had its heyday during the Eisenhower period. Nixon, of course, ran secret full-scale wars in Cambodia and Laos without congressional or public knowledge or approval. Now, after that, the Congress approved the War Powers Resolution. And the War Powers Resolution simply states that the president has to consult with Congress 48 hours before he sends troops. And then the Congress can vote. He has to bring the troops home within 90 days if the Congress doesn't approve it. Well, the executive branch has never really followed this because they say it's unconstitutional. And I agree it's unconstitutional, but for the opposite reason. It really erodes the congressional power to declare war up front. It's admitting that the president has this, it was a very pernicious resolution, even though the intent was good on the part of Congress after Nixon's escapades, because basically it sort of codifies this inherent authority. All the president has to do is say, well, I'm sending these troops, notify some member of Congress or whatever, do it, and then the troops are on the ground. Well, who doesn't want to support the troops when they're on the ground? We see the same problem today. So very rarely does the Congress vote to pull the troops out after 90 days. They usually let them stay in there. So we really need to get back to the Congress approving by a declaration of war military action before it happens, not after it happens, because that never happens. They're always very chicken. Congress is a very timid bunch of people. Now, of course, Reagan invaded Grenada without congressional approval, and even worse, he illegally sold arms to Iran, a terrorist-sponsoring nation, to get money to circumvent the congressional ban on funding Nicaraguan Contras. Now, this was a very bad episode. It was worse than Watergate because, in my mind, the congressional power of the purse, what's left of it, is really the only control that Congress has remaining on the executive branch. And Reagan went right to the center of that and ripped it out because he said, well, we're doing this anyway. We're going to get around this congressional ban. And so I think it was worse than Watergate in undermining congressional checks and balances on the executive branch. So we have this system, and we now have a perverted version of the old system in which we have an imperial presidency. Well, what happens now? Well, the president takes us unilaterally to war. He has great control over the federal budget, even though the Congress is supposed to have that control. We have signing statements. They vetoed, it was ruled unconstitutional, the line item veto a few years back. And that means that a president gets a big bill and it has all this stuff in it. He has to veto the whole bill. He can't veto just one item. Because a lot of times they load stuff into these bills knowing that the president won't veto them. But anyway, that was ruled unconstitutional. But now what we have is Bush is using these signing statements. And Bush hasn't been the first to use many of these things, but he's used them in a quantum leap higher than the other one. He does a signing statement, which is essentially saying that he's either nullifying or changing a law that Congress has passed, and he's changing usually one part of it. So he's got the line item veto essentially with the signing statement, only he's got a plus. The line item veto, the Congress can override it, but they can't override a signing statement. And so this is a way to slide in and get the line item veto without having it. We have now M.B.A, Office of Management and Budget. The budget agency not only controls the budget and consolidates it, it also consolidates all regulations and legislative initiatives. Everything goes through the president. And as I said before, the old system wasn't that great.